and he always had a plan. He made everyone around him better, and that's one of the many things that made him so successful. Tim loved to work and was as dedicated to Johnson Equipment Company as any one person could be. He started days early and ended them late, usually working on quotes or doing takeoffs after dinner and getting the kids to bed. But Tim was a romantic as well. I remember Lori telling me about their date nights where dinner and a movie was always followed by a quick drive around the back of the building to check out the dock equipment that was installed. He just knew the way to her heart. Tim took our business in Oklahoma City to heights we only dreamed of when he first started. He was a rock of our operation, playing many different roles, including salesman, office manager, service manager, and sometimes even installer all at the same time. He was passionate about what he did and passionate about making sure Johnson Equipment Company was successful. Over the years, as I watched Tim's success and our relationship grew stronger, I think I came to understand a little better where his passion came from. One source was his drive to provide for his family. On most of my visits up to Oklahoma City, our days would always end with wings and a beer somewhere, even though we were both usually on a diet. We would sit and talk, watching football or his beloved Oklahoma Thunder. And our conversations would always work its way to our families. And Tim would always brighten up when he would start telling me about Lori and the kids, whether it was Colby's golf lessons, Macy's social butterfly personality, or Lori's marathon training. I know Tim loved them with all of his soul and wanted them to have everything in life. I think another source was his driving desire to succeed. What I think is important to note is that Tim did it the right way, not on the backs or at the expense of others, but rather by earning the trust and respect of his customers, colleagues, and everyone that he worked with. And the final source, I think, that drove him was his unfailing desire not to let anyone down. Because you see, for Tim, letting someone down was worse than failing. He wanted to make Oklahoma City the shining star in our company that we would all be proud of. And I can promise you he did that. I remember the night almost 2 years ago when Tim called me to give me the news that his cancer had returned. It was about 6:30 one evening. He and Lori and the kids were on their way to Colorado to go skiing. We talked for a brief minute, but both were too shocked to say much. And then for 2 years, we all watched Tim take that same fight, determination to succeed and not let anyone down into this battle. And as much as I had learned from Tim in the previous 9 years, he taught me even more in the last 2. He handled his fight with a character and grace that can only come from an unwavering faith. And he made me want to be a better man. And finally, last week, I got the chance to see Tim one last time. And cried and laughed and cried some more. He was always more concerned about others than he was with himself. And that day was no different. He wanted to know how everyone at the office was doing. He wanted to know how our business was. He wanted to know how the company was doing overall. And I could only chuckle a little bit as we were going through some files. He would give me instructions on what to do with each of them, letting me know what the next steps needed to be on outstanding proposals. But that was Tim, working until the bitter end. And as I got up to leave, he said that he had something for me and handed me a sealed box. Asked that I not open it until I got back home to Dallas. So Thursday night when I got back home, I opened the box to find this inside. So Tim, this is for you. I will miss you greatly.
In life, we feel very blessed to have good friends, and even more blessed to have some best friends. But truly blessed is the man to whom God gives a lifelong best friend. You know you have a lifelong best friend when you can't really even remember a time when you didn't know them, when they weren't a part of your life, a part of your story. You know you have a lifelong best friend when you can be separated by hundreds or even thousands of miles, separated for months or even years, but the moment you get back together, it's like you were never apart. For Tim, that person was Colby Spillbush. Tim and Colby grew up together in Perry, Oklahoma. They attended school and church together. Their families were very close. They went off to college together. Tim even named his own son Colby after him. They were lifelong friends by any definition. So when Tim began preparing for this day, he wanted someone to speak for him who really knew who he was. Someone who could communicate what Tim was like, his character, his values, the things that he loved and the way that he lived his life. And again, that person had to be Colby. And so Colby and I sat down together this week and we wrote out some things that he would want you to know and to understand about Tim. We organized his thoughts into 3 categories: Tim's character, his determination in this battle with cancer, and his impact on other people. In terms of Tim's character, Colby saw a person who was selfless. You know, some people do things because they feel obligated, and others do things to get something from you. But Tim was the kind of person who truly enjoyed doing for and serving other people. Tim always wanted to know about others, about you or your family, much more than he ever wanted to talk about himself. Even during his illness, when so many people came with the intention of encouraging Tim or comforting Tim, he always found a way to flip the conversation around and make it about you. He never seemed to want to focus on himself. Colby knew firsthand that Tim had an incredible work ethic, something he learned from his father, Don, and his mother, Sue, growing up on the family farm in Perry. You know, on a farm, you never run out of hard work to do. But in the business world, in the community world, you often have a choice as to whether or not you want to work hard. Tim was the kind of man who chose hard work. And he found a way not only to enjoy it, but to gain a sense of purpose from it. As a teenager, Tim was dedicated to the future farmers of America. I think you saw some of the pictures earlier. He enjoyed caring for and preparing show animals for stock shows. He loved doing projects around his home and helping friends with projects of their own. Tim was loyal. He was a man of his word. His word was as good as gold. He was committed. If he made a plan, he stuck to it. You could count on him anytime you needed a hand or an ear. Interestingly, he carried those experiences and that dedication to hard work over into his career. Tim was the definition of a loyal employee, as you just heard, and he was blessed to work for a loyal employer. In fact, Colby wanted to specifically say thank you on behalf of Tim and his family and everyone to Johnson's Equipment for remaining so loyal to Tim and to his family, especially during these last years. Part of Tim's character was the value he placed on his family. I think everybody here understands how much he loved his family. Tim was a great example of a Christian husband and father. He was strong in his faith. He was committed in his relationship with God. Tim always put his family first, and he put himself second. He was so incredibly proud of his children, both Colby and Macy. He loved to share their success with school and sports and all of their accomplishments. He was especially proud of Colby and his academics and things like track. He beamed when he talked about Macy's musical talents and basketball. Colby described to me one conversation where Tim claimed that he had no idea where the kids got all of their talent. But Colby told him, he said, Tim, when it comes to your kids, it's no time to be humble. That's an area where you always get at least half the blame. You might as well enjoy half the credit as well. And then, of course, there's Lori. And Colby described her as Tim's number one fan, as an angel on earth for Tim. And as a lifelong friend, Colby could testify that their vows for one another and their love for each other were clearly evident from the day they met. And then, of course, you can't talk about Tim Streller without talking about his sense of humor. Tim was incredibly quick-witted when it came to his sense of humor, regardless of the situation. He had an amazing ability to calm and to comfort you with a joke. One thing that really stood out to me about Colby's description of Tim was that Tim had an unmistakable laugh that could be heard in any crowd. And I bet a lot of us here can remember that, and we'll never forget it. In regards to his courageous battle against cancer, some of you may not realize that this was actually Tim's second time to go through that. He was diagnosed with cancer around the age of 19. And try to imagine what that does to a young man who's barely gotten his life started. And yet Colby said that as bad as it was and as hard as it must have been, Tim refused to allow it to break him. And instead he used it to shape him. After a diagnosis, his first year of college, Tim displayed a driven, determined, tenacious desire to live life to the fullest, even in the darkest and most difficult times. Both as a young man and later when battling cancer, Colby said that if you just met Tim and you didn't know of his medical struggles, you never would have. He just simply didn't talk about it. He used it to shape himself, but he refused to allow cancer to define who he was. Tim was never about dying. He was only and always about living. And he beat the odds every time, right up until the last. He never questioned, why me? He never looked for sympathy or sorrow. Colby said he handled it with his chin up, his chest out, and 2 steps forward. And because of that attitude and that approach, he had an impact on thousands of lives throughout his journey in life. Through Facebook. In a day where things positive and uplifting are overshadowed by negativity, Tim found a way to be a light and to encouragement to thousands of other people. Colby stated that the way Tim and his family handled this by using technology and social media in a positive way is a testimony to who they are and what they believe in. They were able to be so open and authentic, and to share and relate it in a way that has touched other people around the world with respect, dignity, and kindness. He said it motivated others in ways none of us may have ever known or will ever understand. There's a lot more that Colby could say about Tim, some of their experiences as kids, their circle of good friends that grew up together and hunted and fished together and stayed connected until the end. All the activities and the experiences that Tim loved to be a part of and the things that he loved to do. But here's how Colby summed up his relationship with Tim and what Tim meant to him. He said he remembered one day when they were kids, they were messing around on the farm, and Tim had this billy goat that was rambunctious and stubborn, and he was always going back and forth with it. So Tim decided to climb over the fence into the little area there, little corral area, pulled off his winter coat, held it out in front of him, and said he was going to be a billy goat matador. Began to wave the coat, and the goat would come at him, and Tim would say "Olay," and he'd jump to the side, and the goat would go by. And Colby said he just laughed, and Tim was showing off and having such a great time, and he couldn't remember who got tired first, Tim or the goat, but eventually Tim gave up, thought he had done everything he needed to do there, and began to climb over the fence. And he said, here comes the billy goat. It got one last good solid shot in right in Tim's rear end, knocked him right over the fence. Colby said he'll never forget laying on the ground in the dirt next to Tim and them laughing so hard they couldn't even see. Colby said when all was said and done, I'll never forget Tim's laughter. So many good times of laughing together. It's that laughter that will get me and all of us through this day and the days ahead. Thank you, Colby, for being a blessing to Tim.
Several months ago, I had the great privilege of getting to know Lori Streller, and I can't tell you how blessed I was that day, hearing and seeing the evidence of God's grace in their life. And one of the things that they were very clear about when speaking of this day is that today was to be a day of celebrating what God has done and is doing in the Streller family. And so we're going to invite you to stand, and we're going to spend some time just singing together and praising our God. Would you sing with us? Sing this. And blessed be your name in the land that is plentiful, where your streams of abundance flow. Blessed be your name. Blessed be your name when I'm found in the desert place. Though I walk through the wilderness, blessed be your name. Sing every blessing. Every blessing you pour out, I'll turn back to praise. When the darkness closes in, Lord, but still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Blessed be your name when the
Every blessing you pour out, I'll turn back to praise. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord, blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord, blessed be your glorious name. And blessed be the name of the Lord, blessed be your name, Jesus. And blessed be the name of the Lord, blessed be your glorious name. Sing this out. You give and take away. You give and take away. You give and take away. My heart will choose to say, Lord, blessed be your name. God, you give and take away. You give and take away. Sing our hearts will choose to say, Lord, blessed be your name. And blessed be the name of the Lord, blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord, blessed be your glorious name. And blessed be the name of the Lord, blessed be your name, Jesus. Blessed be the name of the Lord, blessed be your glorious name. You give and take away. You give